Welcome back to Shadow Trail Files. And today we're traveling deep into the forgotten Appalachian towns scattered across some of the oldest mountains in North America. These small communities may look peaceful during the day, but behind their quiet streets lie chilling stories of unexplained disappearances, strange encounters, and terrifying events that locals still refuse to talk about. Before we begin, if you're new here, we document the strange, the terrifying, and the unexplained from America's wilderness areas and remote mountain towns. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Story 1. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that remained buried for nearly 30 years. Because the people involved were either too frightened to talk about it or simply disappeared before they could. What you're about to hear began in the winter of 1994 in a remote mountain region where entire valleys could go weeks without seeing another human being. The area was known for its forests, denser forests, the kind that swallowed sunlight, the kind where even experienced hunters carried compasses because the trees were so thick they could lose their sense of direction within minutes. But despite its isolation, there was one thing that attracted people to this place. An abandoned military road. Nobody knew exactly why it had been built. Old records suggested the government had started construction decades earlier before abruptly abandoning the project. As a result, the road stretched deep into the wilderness and then simply ended. No town, no military base, no explanation, just miles of cracked asphalt leading nowhere. Most locals avoided it, not because it was dangerous, but because of the stories. People claimed strange lights appeared there at night. Truck drivers reported seeing figures standing in the road before suddenly vanishing. Hunters occasionally found animal carcasses arranged in unusual patterns beside the pavement. No one could explain any of it, and eventually the stories became local legends. Then came January 12th, 1994, a date nobody in the region would ever forget. That morning, 4 friends left a nearby town in a pickup truck. Their names were Michael, Aaron, Lewis, and Greg. All 4 were in their 20s. All 4 loved exploring abandoned places. And all 4 thought the stories about the military road were ridiculous. Their plan was simple: drive to the end of the road, camp overnight, and return the next day. Before leaving town, they stopped at a diner where several locals warned them not to stay there after dark. The friends laughed. One of them even joked that if they saw a ghost, they'd bring it back to town. By noon, they were gone. Around sunset, they reached the end of the road. According to photographs, later recovered from their camera, they appeared to be having a great time. They built a fire, cooked food, took pictures, and made jokes. Nothing seemed unusual. The final photograph was taken at 7:42 p.m. It showed the 4 men standing beside their campfire. Behind them stretched miles of darkness. At first glance, the picture looked completely normal. But years later, investigators noticed something. Near the edge of the frame, partially hidden among the trees, there appeared to be a person. The figure was extremely tall, far taller than any normal human, and judging by the distance between the trees, Its proportions made no sense. At the time, nobody noticed. The friends certainly didn't, because after that photo was taken, the camera was never used again. The next morning, the four men failed to return home. Their families assumed bad weather had delayed them, but when another day passed without contact, concern turned into panic. A search operation was launched. Rescuers reached the campsite late that afternoon. What they found made no sense. The pickup truck was still there. The campfire had burned out. Food remained on plates. Sleeping bags were untouched, and all four men were gone. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no evidence of an accident, nothing. It looked as though they had simply stood up and walked away. Search teams spent days combing the area. Then one volunteer discovered footprints. Hundreds of them. The tracks belonged to the missing men. All four appeared to have left camp together shortly after midnight. But what shocked investigators was the direction. The footprints didn't head back toward town. They moved deeper into the wilderness, directly away from safety. Even stranger, the tracks suggested. The men had been running for nearly 3 miles, barefoot, in freezing temperatures. Searchers followed the trail until reaching a clearing. Then the footprints ended. Not gradually, not because snow covered them. They simply stopped, all at the exact same location. How could 4 people leave footprints that suddenly vanished? No helicopters, no vehicles, no cliffs nearby, nothing. The mystery made regional news. Speculation exploded. Some believed the men had staged their disappearance. Others thought they had encountered criminals. But no theory explained the footprints. Months passed. Then a hunter made a discovery. 20 miles from the campsite, he found a small cabin hidden in the forest. The structure was ancient. Most of it had collapsed. Yet, inside, investigators found evidence that someone had recently been living there. Food wrappers, blankets, empty water containers, and on one wall, written repeatedly in charcoal, the same sentence over and over: "Do not look outside after midnight." Nobody knew who had written it. Forensic teams searched the cabin. Then they found something else. A notebook. Most pages were missing. Only a handful remained. The handwriting belonged to Michael, one of the missing men. The surviving entries were disturbing. The first page read, "We saw lights on the road tonight." Another page said, "Greg thinks someone is following us." A later entry was even stranger. "They stand between the trees. They don't move until you blink." The final surviving page contained only 6 words. "They know we can see them." After that, nothing. The notebook ended. Authorities intensified the search, but no trace of the 4 men appeared. Years passed. The case grew cold. Then came 1999. 5 years after the disappearance, a truck driver was traveling along the abandoned military road shortly after 2 a.m. As he rounded a bend, he saw someone standing in the middle of the pavement. The driver slammed on his brakes. At first, he thought the person needed help. Then he noticed something strange. The figure wasn't moving, not even slightly. The truck stopped about 50 feet away. The driver flashed his headlights. Finally, he stepped out of his vehicle. And that's when he realized the person was staring directly at him, even though it was pitch black. The driver later claimed the figure's eyes reflected light like an animal's. Terrified, he climbed back into his truck. When he looked up again, the figure was gone. The following morning, he reported the encounter. Police dismissed it until he showed them a photograph. He had snapped it a moment before leaving. The image was blurry, but visible. Standing in the road was a man, thin, pale, and wearing torn clothing. Investigators immediately recognized him. It appeared to be Aaron of the missing friends. The photograph made headlines. Experts analyzed it. Some declared it authentic. Others claimed it was a hoax. Before a conclusion could be reached, something even stranger happened. The truck driver disappeared. His truck was later found abandoned beside the same road, engine still running, driver's door open. No sign of him was ever found. After that, local authorities closed public access to the area. Officially, the reason was safety concerns. Unofficially, many believed they were trying to keep people away. But despite the closure, explorers continued sneaking into the forest, and occasionally they returned with stories. Stories about lights moving between trees, stories about figures watching from a distance, stories about hearing voices calling their names from the darkness. One group reported hearing dozens of people whispering simultaneously. Another claimed they saw silhouettes standing silently around their campsite. Every witness described the same feeling, the overwhelming certainty that something was observing them waiting. In 2007, a documentary crew attempted to investigate the legend. They spent 3 nights near the old road. Nothing unusual occurred until their final evening. At approximately 1:17 a.m., one camera captured something. The footage was grainy, lasting only a few seconds, but it showed a tall shape moving between trees at impossible speed. Frame by frame analysis suggested the figure covered nearly 200 feet in less than 3 seconds. No human could move that fast. The footage remains unexplained. Today, the military road still exists. Nature has begun reclaiming it. Trees crack through asphalt. Fog blankets the pavement most mornings, and locals continue avoiding it after sunset, because every few years another report surfaces, another witness, another strange encounter, another person claiming they saw figures standing between the trees, watching, waiting. And if the stories are true, then beyond the end of that forgotten road, whatever caused 4 young men to run barefoot into the darkness may still be there, waiting for the next group of people who decide that local legends aren't real, until they discover why nobody stays there after midnight. Story 2. Stories. On February 3rd, 2007, a truck driver named Marcus Hale pulled into a nearly abandoned gas station located along a forgotten stretch of highway that cut through hundreds of miles of wilderness. The station wasn't unusual, at least not at first. There was a small convenience store, a few fuel pumps, and a motel sitting across the road, the kind of place travelers stopped at briefly before continuing their journey. Marcus had driven this route dozens of times before. He knew every curve in the road, every landmark, every gas station. But this stop would become the last normal moment of his life. After filling his truck, Marcus entered the store to buy coffee. Inside, strange. The cashier looked terrified. Not nervous, but terrified, repeatedly glancing toward the windows as if expecting something to appear outside. Marcus asked if everything was okay. The woman hesitated, then quietly asked him a question. "Did you see anyone standing by pump 4? Marcus turned toward the window. Pump 4 was empty. "No," he replied. The woman looked relieved, then locked the front door. Marcus laughed and assumed she was joking, but she wasn't. Without another word, she walked into the back room and returned carrying a shotgun. And at that point, Marcus decided it was time to leave. He grabbed his coffee and headed outside. As he climbed into his truck, he glanced toward pump 4 and saw someone standing there. A man, completely motionless. Marcus was certain the area had been empty seconds earlier. The figure stood facing the highway, not moving, not reacting, just standing. Eventually he convinced himself it was simply another traveler, started his engine, and continued driving. 2 hours later, he'd reached his destination, and the strange encounter quickly faded from memory. Until the following week, when Marcus stopped at the same gas station again, and immediately noticed vehicles everywhere. The station was closed. Crime scene tape surrounded the building, and when Marcus asked an officer what had happened, the answer chilled him. The cashier had disappeared. Security footage showed her locking the store around midnight, after which she vanished with no sign of forced entry, no struggle, nothing. The investigation initially focused on kidnapping, but then detectives reviewed surveillance footage and found something that made no sense. The final recording showed the cashier standing behind the counter. At 11:57 p.m., she suddenly looked toward the window, and her expression changed instantly to pure fear. She then walked backward, away from the window, as if trying to distance herself from whatever she had seen. Seconds later, the lights flickered, the video distorted, and when the image stabilized, she was gone. Simply gone. No door opened, no window broke. She disappeared between frames. The footage spread among investigators, and nobody could explain it. Then, an officer noticed something reflected in the front window outside near pump 4. A figure standing motionless and watching, in the same position Marcus had seen days earlier. The image was blurry but visible, the figure unusually tall with wrong, stretched proportions. Police searched the surrounding area extensively, but nothing was found. Weeks passed. Then a motel employee across the road reported seeing someone standing beside pump 4 every night, always after midnight, always motionless, always gone before sunrise. The report was dismissed until other witnesses came forward, all with identical descriptions of a silent figure watching near pump 4. Local rumors spread. Truck drivers began avoiding the station. Business collapsed, and within 6 months, the gas station permanently closed. Most people assumed the story would end there, but it didn't. In 2010, 3 urban explorers arrived to investigate the abandoned property. With cameras and equipment, at first nothing unusual occurred as they explored empty motel rooms, the abandoned store, and storage buildings. But then one noticed fresh footprints in the dust, despite the station being abandoned for years. The tracks led into a maintenance room where they found dozens of photographs covering the walls. Thousands of images of the gas station taken from different angles, years, and seasons. Some decades old, others explorers, became uneasy when they discovered several photographs containing people, customers, travelers, employees. Each image focused as if someone had been tracking them. One photograph showed the missing cashier taken from outside her bedroom window weeks before her disappearance. The explorers contacted authorities, who arrived the next morning. But when they entered the maintenance room, every photograph was gone, and the walls were empty. The explorers were accused of fabricating until they showed video footage proving the photographs had existed. Yet investigators never found them. Months later, another disappearance occurred when a truck driver stopped near the station after engine trouble. He called for assistance and waited in his vehicle. But when the tow truck arrived, 2 hours later he was gone. His phone, wallet, and keys left behind with no evidence of what happened. The truck's dashboard camera showed him waiting alone, then suddenly staring toward pump 4 as his expression shifted from confusion to fear to absolute panic before he opened the door and ran into the darkness, after which a tall figure briefly crossed the frame. As years passed, reports continued of a motionless stand, sometimes appearing in multiple places or vanishing when approached. In 2021, construction crews preparing to demolish the site discovered the underground fuel storage area, covered in hundreds of carved names belonging to missing persons from different states and decades, an unexplained discovery that halted the project. Today, the gas station no longer exists, the buildings demolished and pumps removed. Yet drivers still report seeing a lone figure standing where pump 4 once stood, watching traffic pass, waiting completely motionless. And according to witnesses, if you stop and look directly at it, it won't be there anymore, because somehow it will already be standing much closer than before. Story 3. The emergency call came in at exactly 3:11 a.m. At first, the dispatcher assumed it was a prank. The caller wasn't screaming, wasn't crying, wasn't asking for help. Instead, the man spoke in a calm, almost emotionless voice, and what he said made absolutely no sense. "Please, don't send anyone to my house." The dispatcher paused. Normally people called emergency services because they wanted help, not because they wanted to stop it. She asked if he was in danger. The caller immediately replied, "Yes." The dispatcher asked what was happening. There was a long silence. Then the man spoke again. "Something is pretending to be my wife." The dispatcher assumed the caller was either intoxicated or experiencing a mental health crisis. Still, protocol required her to continue. She asked for his address. The man provided it. A small farmhouse, located nearly 20 miles outside town. The property sat completely isolated. No close neighbors, no nearby businesses, just miles of fields and forest. The dispatcher asked where his wife was. The response made her uneasy. "She's downstairs." Another pause. "At least I think she is." The dispatcher asked what that meant. The man lowered his voice, almost to a whisper. "Because my real wife is sitting beside me." For several seconds, neither person spoke. The dispatcher looked at the call timer. 3 minutes had passed. The caller's breathing became increasingly uneven. Then she heard something. Somewhere in the background, calling the man's name. The dispatcher assumed it was the wife downstairs. Then the caller spoke, and what he said caused her to stop typing. That's the problem. The dispatcher felt a chill run through her body, because the woman speaking in the background sounded extremely close. Not downstairs, not somewhere else in the house. Close enough to be standing beside the phone. The dispatcher immediately informed the caller that officers were already being sent. The man became frantic. "No," his voice cracked. "No police." The dispatcher asked why. The caller answered instantly. "Because if they come inside, she'll know we're awake." The line suddenly filled with static, then disconnected. Emergency units were dispatched immediately. The nearest deputy was over 30 minutes away. During that time, dispatchers repeatedly attempted to call the residents back. No answer. By the time officers arrived, dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. The farmhouse appeared completely normal. No signs of forced entry. No signs of violence. Nothing. Officers approached cautiously. The front door was unlocked. Inside, they found the homeowner. His name was Daniel Reeves, 43 years old, married. No criminal history. No history of mental illness. Daniel was sitting on the floor of an upstairs bedroom, dead. There were no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle, nothing suggesting how he had died. His wife, Sarah, was discovered downstairs in the kitchen, also dead, just like Daniel. No injuries, no explanation. Investigators were immediately confused. Then they found something even stranger. The bedroom. Every piece of furniture had been pushed against the door. The bed, dressers, chairs, anything heavy enough to move, all piled into a barricade, as if Daniel had desperately been trying to keep something out. But, according to the evidence, nobody had entered. Nobody had left. It was sealed. The house was sealed. The autopsy deepened the mystery. Neither victim showed signs of poisoning. Neither had suffered trauma. Neither appeared sick. Officially, no cause of death could be determined. The case quickly became one of the most baffling investigations in state history. Then detectives reviewed the emergency call. Several investigators noticed something disturbing. The female voice heard in the background sounded identical to Sarah, exactly identical. But, according to forensic analysis, Sarah was already dead when the call was made. Experts estimated she had died hours earlier. That should have been impossible, yet the timeline refused to change. The voice was recorded after her death. Weeks later, investigators searched every inch of the farmhouse. A technician discovered something hidden inside the attic. A small, wooden box. Inside were dozens of notebooks belonging to Daniel. The earliest entries appeared normal. Daily events, work schedules, family activities. Then, about 6 months before his death, the tone changed. Sarah keeps entering rooms without making a sound. Today, she answered a question before I asked it. At first, investigators assumed Daniel had become paranoid, but the entries continued, growing more disturbing with each page. She stood outside the bathroom for 2 hours. She says things before they happen. Sometimes she watches me sleep. Then came an entry, written only 3 days before the emergency call. I don't think she's Sarah anymore. Detectives interviewed friends and relatives. Most described Sarah as kind and normal, but several admitted noticing unusual behavior. Withdrawn periods, motionless staring, expressions that felt absent, like she was pretending to understand emotions. Then, a neighboring farmer came forward. He claimed that nights before the deaths, he saw Sarah standing in a field behind the farmhouse at 2 a.m., completely alone, motionless, facing the woods. Then he noticed another figure standing among the trees watching her. Years passed. The mystery remained unsolved. Then, in 2014, a documentary crew found a family photo inside the farmhouse. At first it looked ordinary. Daniel, Sarah, a dog. But zooming in revealed a face outside a distant window, partially hidden behind curtains. The same face appeared in other photographs taken inside the house, in different rooms and years, always watching, always slightly closer, as if moving through the house over time. The discovery reignited interest, but nothing new emerged. Until 2019, when a construction crew purchased the property and began demolition. On the third morning, one worker vanished. His truck was found parked beside the structure, engine running, phone on the seat, coffee still warm. He was gone. Search teams never found him. The demolition was abandoned. Today, the farmhouse still stands, rotting beneath decades of neglect, avoided by locals, not because they believe the stories, but because too many visitors report the same feeling, that someone else is already inside, watching, waiting, listening. And according to witnesses, if you stay long enough, you eventually hear footsteps moving through empty rooms. Slow, deliberate, patient. And the truly disturbing part isn't hearing them. It's realizing they're always moving toward you. Story 4. In the autumn of 2011, a group of 6 experienced hikers set out to explore a mountain range that most people had never heard of. The mountains weren't famous. They weren't tourist attractions, and very few maps even showed the trails correctly, which was exactly why the group wanted to go there. They enjoyed remote, forgotten places where it felt like the modern world didn't exist. All 6 friends were highly experienced, carried proper equipment, and had completed far more dangerous expeditions before, so nothing about this trip seemed unusual at first. On October 14th, they parked at the base of the mountains and began climbing under nearly perfect conditions. Clear skies, mild temperatures, and excellent visibility. According to GPS data recovered later, they made steady progress throughout the day and by evening reached a high valley surrounded by steep cliffs, a hidden stretch of wilderness untouched by roads or buildings, where they set up camp. The first sign something was wrong came shortly after midnight when one hiker, Ryan, woke suddenly and realized the forest was completely silent. No wind, no insects, no animals. An unnatural silence he later described as feeling alive. Stepping outside, he noticed a small white light near the tree line that remained perfectly still for minutes before he returned to his tent. The next morning, 2 others admitted seeing the same light. But the group continued. Over the next 2 days, deeper into the mountains, the strange events increased. Footsteps behind them with no sources, whispering heard by lone hikers, and distant figures appearing between trees before vanishing. By the 4th evening they reached Black Hollow, a dark valley between towering cliffs where sunlight barely reached. That night, at 2:43 a.m., all 6 hikers woke at the exact same moment and heard slow footsteps circling the campsite. Crunch, 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 moving around them for nearly 10 minutes without ever approaching or retreating, just circling again and again until suddenly stopping. In the morning, they found hundreds of identical footprints surrounding the camp, as if made by a single entity, yet with no incoming or outgoing trail. Disturbed but still continuing, they later found an abandoned fire lookout tower covered in thousands of names, dates, and messages with one repeated warning. Do not answer if you hear your name. That night, while camping again, a hiker named Jessica heard her brother's voice calling her name outside her tent, despite him being hundreds of miles away. She stayed silent, as did others who also heard familiar voices calling them, each person hearing something different but personal, and all of them resisting the urge to respond. The group finally decided to leave, but GPS units malfunctioned, compasses spun, and for hours they walked in apparent circles despite moving forward. Then Connor disappeared without warning. His voice was later heard, calling for help from deep within the forest, but it never grew closer, no matter how far they moved toward it, until they realized the warning. Do not answer if you hear your name. Connor was never found again. The remaining hikers escaped. 2 days later, traumatized, and despite massive search efforts, helicopters, dogs, volunteers, no trace of Connor was ever recovered. 6 months later, his backpack was found in Black Hollow containing supplies, but no journal. Years afterward, a surviving hiker revealed she had seen dozens of motionless figures standing among the trees watching their camp on the final night. But she never reported it, because she wasn't sure they were people. And according to local legends, that is exactly the mistake travelers make in Black Hollow. They assume they are being watched by people, right before they realize they are not. Story 5. The first report seemed so ridiculous that nobody took it seriously. A train conductor called railway authorities and claimed he had seen a passenger standing inside an abandoned station. The problem was that the station had been closed for nearly 40 years. No trains stopped there, no roads led to it, and, according to official records, nobody had entered the property in decades. The conductor's report was filed and forgotten. Then another report arrived, and another, and another. Within 2 years, dozens of train crews had reported seeing the same thing, a lone passenger standing on the platform at night, always motionless, always watching the train pass. The abandoned station sat deep within a heavily forested region, hundreds of miles from any major city, built in the early 1900s to serve a mining community that eventually disappeared. When the mines closed, families moved away, businesses collapsed, and by the 1970s, the station itself was abandoned and slowly reclaimed by nature as trees swallowed buildings, tracks rusted, and roads vanished under vegetation until the place faded from memory. Except for the train crews who kept seeing someone there, a tall man in dark clothing, standing beneath the station's broken clock, never moving, never reacting, never leaving, just watching. Most people dismissed the reports until October 2013, when a railway maintenance team of 5 experienced workers was assigned to inspect tracks near the abandoned station. They arrived after sunrise and found everything as expected. Old, rotting, empty. After several hours of inspection, one worker discovered fresh footprints. At first, nobody cared, assuming trespassers, but the tracks continued and continued, circling the station repeatedly, as if someone had been walking around it for hours. Yet, there were no tracks leading away, only circles. The workers followed the prints inside, where everything was covered in dust and undisturbed, until they reached the station master's office, where they found a chair positioned directly in front of the window. Placed, facing the railway tracks, as if someone had been waiting. The crew was unsettled, but the real disturbance came when, reviewing photographs taken during inspection, a figure appeared in the background of multiple images, seen outside different windows in different locations, yet all photos were taken within minutes of each other, implying impossible movement. The next day, the chair was gone. Months later, urban explorers spent a night inside the station with cameras and sleeping bags. At first, nothing happened, but shortly after midnight, they heard slow footsteps on the platform outside. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Yet when they checked, no one was there. The footsteps continued circling the empty platform. At approximately 2:07 a.m., a camera captured a hallway where a figure briefly appeared at the far end for a single frame before vanishing again, as if it existed for less than a second. The explorers left before sunrise. Years later, experts confirmed no manipulation in the footage. In 2017, railway engineer Victor Monroe approached the station during an overnight freight route and saw the same figure, standing beneath the broken clock. This time, the figure slowly raised its arm and pointed at the train, and Victor later realized it wasn't watching the train, it was watching him. He reported it, but authorities ignored him until he quit 2 weeks later, and later disappeared near a hiking trail. Never found. Rumors grew that the figure only appeared to those who would vanish, or that seeing it meant it would begin appearing elsewhere, in reflections, photographs, dreams. In 2020, a journalist investigating the station discovered that the final station master, Thomas Grayson, had disappeared in 1968, and an old photograph of him showed a man identical to witnesses' descriptions standing beneath the clock, looking directly at the camera. The journalist abandoned the investigation shortly before publishing, saying only, "I think the reports are true." The station continued decaying until 2024, when drone footage captured a lone figure on the platform, once again, motionless beneath the broken clock. Authorities found nothing. No footprints, no evidence. Today trains still pass the abandoned station at night, and conductors still report seeing the man beneath the clock, watching, waiting, never moving, never aging. But veteran railway workers note one detail that almost nobody notices. The station clock stopped decades ago, yet whenever the figure appears, the clock behind him is always running and always showing the same time. 3 by 7 a.m. Story 6. In the summer of 2016, a security company received a contract that seemed incredibly simple. A wealthy businessman had purchased an enormous estate far from any major city, covering thousands of acres of forests, fields, private roads, and several buildings. With a massive mansion at the center, the businessman planned to renovate it before moving in, and wanted overnight security until then. Nothing unusual, just guards preventing trespassers. The assignment was given to a 29-year-old guard named Ethan Cole, who had years of experience working security at warehouses, construction sites, shopping centers, and abandoned buildings, and believed nothing could frighten him anymore. On his first night, Ethan arrived shortly before sunset and was given a tour by the property manager, who explained that everything was normal. Power worked, security cameras worked, and the mansion was empty. Before leaving, the manager handed him a folder with maps and emergency contacts, then hesitated and said, "If you hear knocking after midnight, don't open the door," which made Ethan laugh, though the manager did not. By 9 p.m., Ethan was alone in the enormous estate, where hallways stretched into darkness, and wind moved through old trees outside, while the house creaked with shifting temperature, but nothing unusual happened until midnight passed, and at exactly 12:41 a.m., someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Ethan checked the cameras, but no one was outside, and the porch was empty, so he assumed he imagined it. Then it happened again. Knock, 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 louder this time, still with no sign of anyone on any camera. The knocking continued every few minutes until sunrise, when it suddenly stopped. The next morning, the property manager only asked, "Did you open the door?" and seemed relieved when Ethan said no. For the next several nights, the same pattern repeated. 3 knocks after midnight, always at the front door, always no one there, until night 7, when at 1:13 a.m. the knocking came again. But this time it was inside the house. Ethan froze, as it came from upstairs, then from a hallway, always slow and deliberate, like knuckles striking wood, moving location each time he checked, always just out of sight, until after nearly 20 minutes it stopped. The next morning, security footage showed that at 1:13 a.m., every camera inside the mansion had gone offline for exactly 38 seconds, with no explanation. Over the following weeks, the disturbances escalated. Doors opened on their own, lights turned on in empty rooms, motion sensors triggered without movement, and one camera repeatedly captured a figure standing at the forest's edge at exactly 2:22 a.m., never closer, never farther, just watching. When Ethan zoomed in, the image distorted, and by morning it was gone. A second guard, named Lucas, later joined the assignment, but immediately felt something was wrong, describing an unseen presence watching and waiting. On his third night, Lucas saw the figure himself at 2:02 a.m. among the trees, motionless and unresponsive. When he tried to approach despite Ethan's warning, the figure vanished instantly without running or walking. Lucas quit 2 days later without explanation. After a major storm uprooted trees on the estate, workers discovered a buried metal hatch leading to an underground tunnel, network far older than the mansion, stretching for miles in some directions. Deep inside, they found a room filled with hundreds of photographs of the mansion from different decades, many showing people at windows being watched by a hidden figure in the background, along with journals from past owners describing the same phenomena. Knocking after midnight, a figure near the forest, and an overwhelming sense of being watched, with one repeated warning written over and over: never answer the knocking. Investigators discovered that for nearly 200 years, different structures had stood on the same land, each eventually burned, collapsed, or abandoned before being rebuilt again, as if something kept drawing people back. In November 2017, Ethan worked his final shift when at 2:22 a.m., every camera activated at once, and the figure appeared no longer at the forest edge, but standing directly on the porch, impossibly tall, filling the doorway. Then the knocking began again. 3 slow knocks right in front of him. Ethan did not open the door, and at sunrise the figure disappeared. He resigned that day. The estate remains privately owned. Former workers still report the same events. Impossible figures on cameras, footsteps in empty halls, and knocking that always begins after midnight. And every account agrees on one rule. If someone knocks after midnight, you never answer, because whatever is outside already knows you're in there, and it isn't trying to get inside, it's waiting for permission. Story 7. In 2008, a cargo ship disappeared without sending a distress call. No emergency beacon, no mayday transmission, no signs of mechanical failure. One day it was sailing across open water, and the next it was gone. At first, nobody considered it unusual, since ships occasionally vanished from radar due to technical issues. Weather disruptions were common, and most missing vessels were eventually found. But this one wasn't. The ship was called the Meridian Star, a medium-sized cargo vessel carrying construction equipment between 2 ports nearly 1,000 miles apart, with 19 experienced crew members on board and a captain considered highly skilled. And nothing about the voyage suggested any risk. The weather was calm. The ship had passed inspection, and everything appeared routine until September 18th, when contact was suddenly lost after the captain's final radio transmission reporting calm seas and clear skies, followed by silence. Hours passed. Repeated contact attempts failed, and the next morning authorities launched a full search with aircraft and ships, but found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no life rafts, nothing. As if the ship had simply vanished. Months later, the search was suspended, but 11 months after the disappearance, another vessel spotted something drifting far from the original route. The Meridian Star. Authorities boarded it, expecting answers, but found the ship completely empty. No crew, no bodies, No signs of violence or evacuation, just untouched meals, coffee cups, and personal belongings left exactly where they had been, suggesting a sudden disappearance. Then, investigators noticed something even stranger. Every clock aboard the ship, wall clocks, digital clocks, wristwatches, had stopped at exactly 4. The investigation intensified as experts combed the vessel, eventually finding a surviving radio recorder in the communications room containing routine logs until the final transmission, where a crew member asked, "Captain, do you see that?" Followed by confusion about moving lights, heavy breathing, and the chilling statement, "There shouldn't be land out here." Before the signal abruptly ended, navigation data confirmed no land nearby, and the captain's logbook added further disturbing detail, describing strange moving lights at night that behaved unnaturally, moving against wind, changing direction instantly, and even appearing beneath the water, culminating in the final entry. "They're getting closer every night." Divers later discovered deep, unnatural scratches across the ship's hull, extending far below the waterline, not matching rocks, vessels, or marine life, leaving their origin unexplained. Months later, recovered security footage showed flashes of bright lights beneath the ocean, circling the ship just before 4:18 a.m., after which all cameras failed simultaneously at the exact moment. Every clock stopped. Theories ranging from piracy to government activity failed to explain the evidence. A damaged crew laptop, later fragments of a journal, figures standing on the water at night, and a final entry stating, "They only appear when the lights come." Years later, in 2017, a distant vessel picked up a faint, distorted radio transmission believed to be from the Meridian Star's captain, ending with the words, "Turn off the lights," though its origin could not be confirmed. In 2022, sonar data from an oceanographic vessel detected a massive unknown object moving beneath the sea, near the original disappearance zone, larger than any known marine life, which briefly followed the ship before vanishing. Today, the Meridian Star remains under investigation in restricted archives, with no explanation for what happened to its crew, what the lights were, or why every clock stopped at exactly 4:18 a.m. But sailors still report strange lights beneath the ocean and unexplained radio signals in that region, and according to those who know the sea best, if you ever see lights moving under your ship where no lights should exist, the safest thing you can do is look away, because some say the lights only approach once they know you've seen them. And the Meridian Star may not have been lost at all, but found. Story 8. In late 2014, a private security company was hired by a telecommunications provider to protect a remote cell tower deep in a heavily forested region, miles from any towns or roads, where technicians kept repairing a persistent fault that would always return within days, despite no clear cause. After 6 months of unexplained outages blamed on weather, animals, and vandals, a night guard named Trevor Mason, former military, calm, experienced, was assigned to monitor the site alone. The first 2 nights were quiet, but on night 3, at 1:12 a.m., surveillance cameras facing the forest began failing one by one until all exterior feeds went dark, while only tower-facing cameras remained active. When Trevor stepped outside, the forest was unnaturally silent. No wind, no insects, no animals. And at 1:37 a.m. the cameras returned, showing the same impossible image on every feed. A tall, indistinct figure, standing among the trees, visible simultaneously across multiple cameras positioned too far apart for any single person to occupy. Authorities dismissed it as a glitch, but on night 5, at 2:03 a.m., Trevor heard metallic knocking on the tower itself, and outside, he later found a photograph taped to a support beam showing the tower at night, with Trevor's own vehicle visible beside it, and a person standing near the maintenance building, implying someone had been watching and documenting him in real time. Searches revealed nothing. No footprints, no tracks, no evidence of entry. Yet outages worsened. Cables were found damaged without witnesses, and motion sensors never triggered. A notebook discovered near the tower contained fragmented entries like, "The signal is stronger. Tonight. Do not answer the voice." And finally, in different handwriting, it's inside the transmission. A second guard named Aaron later reported hearing whispers from the forest and claimed to see a tall figure beneath the tower before quitting, abruptly, never returning. Engineers eventually discovered all outages occurred at exactly 2:17 a.m., a timestamp that strangely matched historical radio interference in the region predating the tower itself. On October 21st, 2015, at 2:16 a.m., all communications failed simultaneously, followed by a full power loss at 2:17. Backup systems briefly activated before failing again, and when power returned, Trevor Mason was gone. His flashlight and radio left behind, his truck still parked outside, with no sign of struggle or escape. Security footage. Toward the forest as a tall figure appeared between the trees, after which the recording cut out. The tower was later decommissioned, officially for cost reasons, though most staff refused to return. Today it still stands rusting above the trees, and hikers occasionally report voices, equipment malfunctions, and the sense of being watched near 2:17 a.m., sometimes even seeing a motionless figure beneath the tower looking up at its blinking red light, because whatever caused the interference was never inside the system, but something it was broadcasting. And if the old records are right, the signal never actually stopped. Story 9. In the winter of 2012, a regional railway authority received a series of complaints from train crews traveling through a long-forgotten stretch of track that cut through an empty mountain valley, officially marked as inteeped on modern rail maps, a place where no scheduled trains were supposed to stop and where maintenance had not been carried out in years. At first, the reports were dismissed as fatigue or misidentification, but they kept repeating with disturbing consistency. Every crew described seeing a single passenger standing at a platform that should have been sealed off decades ago. The station had once served a small mining settlement, but after the mines collapsed, and the town was abandoned. The station was shut down. Its access roads removed from official use, and its name erased from most operational charts, leaving only rusted tracks and a decaying platform swallowed by forest. Yet train after train reported the same sight: a tall figure standing, motionless beneath a broken overhead sign, always visible only at night, always facing the passing trains, never waving, never moving, never reacting, as if waiting for something that would never arrive. By 2013, the reports escalated enough that a maintenance crew was sent to inspect the track. And surrounding infrastructure, a team of 5 experienced railway workers tasked with verifying whether trespassers were responsible for the sightings. They arrived at sunrise, expecting nothing, finding only decay, warped rails, collapsing wooden supports, and a station building half collapsed into itself, with dust so thick it suggested years of total abandonment. But as they documented the site, one technician noticed something impossible. Fresh footprints in the dust around the platform, circling it again and again in perfect loops, as if someone had been pacing there for hours without ever leaving. The strange part was not just the repetition, but the absence of entry or exit marks. There were no tracks leading in from the forest, and none leading away. Only the circles around the platform itself, as though the presence had always been there and never arrived at all. The crew followed the footprints into the station building, where they discovered a single chair, placed directly in front of a shattered window, overlooking the tracks, positioned deliberately, as if someone had been sitting there for long periods, watching trains that no longer officially stopped. Nothing else inside showed signs of life, yet every object felt subtly disturbed, as if recently handled, and then carefully returned. When the team reviewed photographs taken during their inspection, they found something they could not explain. In several images taken minutes apart, a faint figure appeared in different parts of the station, sometimes near the platform, sometimes inside the building, sometimes just beyond the treeline. Despite no one physically moving through those positions in real time. The crew left the station early, but the disturbances did not end there. Weeks later, urban explorers entered the site at night and reported hearing footsteps moving along the platform, slow and rhythmic, matching the exact sound of someone walking just behind them. Though every camera they used showed nothing at all. At 2:07 a.m., one device briefly captured a figure standing in the corridor of the station, but it appeared only for a single frame. One instant empty, the next instant occupied, then empty again, as if reality itself had skipped a moment. The explorers fled before sunrise and refused to return. In 2017, a freight engineer passing through the region at night saw the figure himself beneath the broken station clock, motionless and perfectly centered in the beam of his train's headlights. According to his report, the figure did something no previous witness had described. It raised its arm slowly and pointed directly at the train, not as a warning, but as recognition, as if acknowledging something specific about the person inside. The engineer later resigned without explanation, and avoided discussing the event. Though colleagues, said he, began covering reflective surfaces and refusing to work night shifts entirely. Then, in 2020, a historian researching abandoned rail infrastructure uncovered an old station master's photograph from decades earlier, showing the same platform, the same broken clock, and a tall figure standing exactly where modern witnesses described it, except the image was dated long before the station's closure. The historian never published her findings. Her final note simply stated that the figure seemed aware of the camera itself. Today, the station remains officially closed, overgrown, and structurally unstable. Yet, train crews still report sightings when passing at night. Always the same silhouette beneath the clock, always motionless, always waiting, as if time never moved forward for whatever stands there. And according to long-time railway workers, the most disturbing detail is not that the figure appears, but that the station clock, long broken and frozen in reality, is sometimes seen working in reflections, always showing the same time, just before the next train arrives, Storth 10. In 2013, a deep-sea research vessel named the Ardent Horizon set out to map an uncharted section of ocean, thousands of miles from any major shipping route, an area so remote that even commercial aircraft rarely crossed overhead, and satellite scans showed only endless, empty water. The mission was routine at first: sonar mapping, temperature sampling, and pressure readings from depths rarely explored. But within the first week, the crew began noticing something unusual in the data: a persistent, structured echo beneath the seabed, as if a massive object was moving slowly under the ocean floor itself. At first, the scientists assumed it was a geological formation or a malfunction in the sonar array, but the readings grew stronger. Each night, always peaking around the same hour, always returning from the same coordinates, despite the ship drifting miles in different directions. By the 10th night, the ocean around them began behaving strangely. Surface currents shifted without wind, and bioluminescent organisms appeared in unnatural concentrations, forming faint, glowing patterns beneath the waves that seemed almost deliberate, as if responding to something below. The crew dismissed it as coincidence until the first visual anomaly occurred. At 3:41 a.m., a watch officer reported faint lights beneath the ship, deep under the water, moving in synchronized patterns that circled the vessel without breaking the surface. When sonar operators cross-checked the readings, they found a massive shape, tracking them, larger than any known marine animal, yet moving with precision that suggested intent rather than instinct. The captain ordered a full scan, but all external cameras briefly failed at exactly 3:42 a.m., and when they returned, the lights were gone, leaving only static water and an unexplained temperature drop across the entire hull. Over the next several nights, the phenomenon repeated, each time closer, each time more structured, until crew members began reporting voices over the internal communication system. Low, distorted transmissions that sounded like human speech, but carried no identifiable source. One technician claimed he heard his own name spoken through the sonar headset, followed by instructions in a language he did not recognize but somehow understood. Then, on the 14th night, the vessel's navigation systems began malfunctioning simultaneously, locking the ship in a slow circular drift, despite calm seas and clear conditions. At 4:18 a.m., every instrument aboard the ship reset at once. Clocks, sonar, radios, even backup systems, all freezing on the same timestamp or shutting down entirely. In the final recorded transmission, the captain's voice was audible but fractured, reporting that the lights were no longer beneath them but surrounding them, above and below simultaneously, and that the ocean itself seemed to be opening. Seconds later, the feed cut out completely when a search vessel discovered the ardent horizon months later. It was drifting intact but entirely empty, with no signs of struggle or evacuation. Only personal belongings left in place, meals half finished, and navigation screens frozen on a depth far greater than the surrounding seafloor should have allowed. The most disturbing discovery was that every digital clock on board had stopped at 4:18 a.m., while mechanical watches in sealed compartments had also stopped at the exact same moment. No bodies were ever found, and sonar scans of the surrounding waters revealed only one anomaly: a massive, slowly receding structure beneath the seabed that matched no known geological formation, still moving even after the ship had been recovered. Today, maritime experts still debate whether the ardent horizon encountered a natural phenomenon, a failed experiment, or something entirely unknown beneath the ocean floor. But sailors in that region still report seeing synchronized lights deep underwater, always circling, always watching, and always disappearing the moment a ship tries to follow them. And according to veteran captains, the worst part is not that the lights appear, it's that they only appear once. A vessel has already entered their path, as if the ocean is no longer hiding something, but observing who notices it first. Story 11. In the spring of 2009, a government geological survey team was sent to investigate a remote desert basin that had recently shown unusual underground activity on satellite scans. A place so isolated that it was marked on most maps only as an empty stretch of desert with no recorded infrastructure, no settlements, and no history of scientific excavation, where the land itself was described by earlier explorers as quiet, in a way that feels unnatural. And when the team arrived, they found exactly that: an endless expanse of cracked salt flats and jagged rock formations rising from the sand like broken monuments, with no sound except the wind, and no movement except shifting dust. And at the center of their coordinates lay the anomaly, a perfectly circular underground structure, detected at a depth far beyond what natural geology should allow, too symmetrical to be a cave system, and too precise to be a random formation, prompting Dr. Alan Mercer and his 6-person team to establish a temporary research base 5 miles away, where they deployed seismic sensors, radar mapping arrays, and a drilling rig designed for extreme depth sampling. And at first, everything behaved normally as they recorded standard geological data from sandstone layers and compacted sediment that showed millions of years of untouched stratification. But beneath all of it, their instruments began detecting a rhythmic pulse, deep underground, steady and repeating like a heartbeat that did not match any known tectonic pattern. And although they initially dismissed it as equipment interference or natural resonance, the pulse remained consistent through day and night cycles, without deviation. And on the third day, they began drilling directly into the anomalies, projected coordinates, passing through hundreds of meters of ordinary Earth until, at exactly 312 meters depth, the drill suddenly halted, despite no visible obstruction, as if encountering a material that resisted force dynamically, shifting its density in response to pressure rather than breaking or yielding. And when they retrieved the core sample, they discovered a substance that resembled stone but contained impossibly structured internal geometry, repeating patterns layered within. Patterns at different scales, as though the material had been manufactured or encoded rather than formed, and one engineer quietly remarked that it looked built, not natural, after which the mood of the team shifted as the underground pulses intensified. That same night, becoming faster and more structured, no longer random but coordinated, and at 2:11 a.m., all seismic sensors briefly synchronized and recorded the same reading simultaneously across the entire site, despite being placed miles apart, which should have been impossible. And then the ground beneath their camp registered a new anomaly, a hollow space expanding where none had existed before, growing slowly, as if something below was opening rather than collapsing. And when Dr. Mercer ordered a second drilling attempt, the next morning, the rig began producing abnormal vibrations that matched the same rhythmic pulse detected underground, as if the machine itself was being answered. And by the fifth day, communications from the main base began experiencing interference at exactly the same time. Every night with static patterns, forming repeating sequences that technicians could not decode, but which appeared almost structured like a language. And one communications officer swore he heard a voice hidden inside the noise, not speaking clearly but repeating a pattern that matched the seismic rhythm exactly. And as paranoia began to spread through the team, they started noticing that the desert around them was no longer completely silent, because as at night there were faint mechanical sounds beneath the sand, distant and slow, like massive components shifting far below the surface. And on the seventh night, the drilling team reached 418 meters depth, where the drill stopped completely, and all power systems briefly shut down. And when backup systems restarted the drill, head had been rotated 90 degrees without human input, pointing not downward but sideways, as if the structure below had redirected it. And at that moment, every sensor across the entire basin recorded a synchronized event, a sudden expansion of the underground cavity into a vast circular chamber miles wide, too large to be natural, perfectly geometric and filled with layered energy readings that resembled electrical activity, but were too stable and uniform to be geological. And then all instruments simultaneously registered a single anomaly, rising from within the chamber, moving upward toward the drill site at a constant speed, not fast enough to be explosive, but too precise to be natural. And when the team attempted to evacuate, they realized their GPS systems had all locked onto the same coordinates deep underground, ignoring surface reality entirely, as if the reference point had shifted. And at 3:33 a.m., every radio transmission from the camp was replaced with a single repeating signal that matched the underground pulse exactly, now louder, now sing beneath their feet. And Dr. Mercer ordered the immediate shutdown of all equipment. But it was already too late, because the desert itself had begun to vibrate in perfect rhythm, and on the final recorded footage from the base camp cameras, the sand can be seen subtly rising and falling like breathing. And at 4:18 a.m., every device in the camp simultaneously stopped recording. Every light failed. Every sensor went silent for exactly 12 seconds before reactivating with no data stored from that interval. And when emergency response teams arrived, 3 days later, the entire site was intact but abandoned, with no signs of struggle, no footprints leaving the area, no equipment damaged, only the drilling rig frozen in place, pointing sideways into empty air above the sand, as if something beneath had moved the entire structure without breaking it. And the core samples were missing from all storage units, though no one could determine when or how they had been removed. And in the weeks that followed, satellite imagery revealed a faint circular shadow forming beneath the desert surface, exactly where the anomaly had been detected, slowly expanding outward like a ring. And even today, the site remains classified, with no official explanation released. But seismic stations in the region still detect a rhythmic pulse at irregular intervals that always begins at exactly 4:18 a.m. And researchers who have studied the data claim that it is no longer random, but responsive, as if whatever lies beneath is no longer just active, but aware and waiting for something above to notice it first. Story 12. In the autumn of 2015, a small telecommunications company received a maintenance request for a rural data relay station located deep inside a forested mountain region, a site originally built to support emergency signals for hikers and forestry workers, but which had long been automated and rarely visited due to its isolation. And the technician assigned to inspect it, a man named Caleb Turner, arrived, expecting nothing more than routine diagnostics and minor equipment repairs. But from the moment he entered the region, he noticed that his GPS began behaving strangely, repeatedly recalculating routes, as though the roads themselves were shifting slightly. And when he finally reached the narrow gravel path leading to the relay station, he discovered that it ended far earlier than it should have according to the official map, forcing him to continue on foot through dense forest, where the trees grew unnaturally close together, and the air felt unusually still, as if the entire environment was holding its breath. And after nearly an hour of walking, he finally reached the relay station, a tall steel tower surrounded by a small fenced perimeter and a single maintenance building that looked far older than its recorded installation date, with rust patterns suggesting long-term exposure far beyond what official records indicated. And as he stepped inside the control room, he immediately noticed that all systems appeared operational. But despite the company's report of repeated outages, but every log file showed something strange. Brief system. Interruptions always occurring at exactly 1:58 a.m., lasting precisely 34 seconds, with no recorded cause or error explanation. And although Caleb initially assumed corrupted data, the consistency of the timestamps unsettled him, and he decided to stay overnight to observe the system directly, setting up a small monitoring station inside the building where he could watch both internal diagnostics and external camera feeds. And for several hours everything remained stable until 1:57 a.m., when all environmental sensors outside suddenly dropped to zero activity at once, as if the entire forest had instantly become motionless, followed by complete radio silence and a faint electrical hum rising from the tower itself. And at exactly 1:58 a.m., every external camera feed simultaneously glitched, not into static, but into a single repeated image, showing the same view from different angles. A tall shape standing at the edge of the tree line, partially obscured, but clearly visible on every camera, despite their wide physical separation. And what disturbed Caleb most was not the presence of the figure, but the fact that it appeared to be looking directly at the tower from every angle at once, as if it did not occupy a single position, but existed simultaneously across all viewpoints. And during those 34 seconds, the tower itself began emitting a low rhythmic pulse that matched no known transmission frequency. And Caleb attempted to access the system logs, only to find that all data streams were being overwritten in real time, with identical repeating patterns consisting of alternating signal bursts and silent gaps, like a structured code rather than a malfunction. And just before 1:59 a.m., everything stopped abruptly. The forest sounds returned instantly, and the figure was gone from all feeds, as if it had never existed, leaving Caleb shaken, but determined to continue monitoring. And over the next 2 nights, the same phenomenon repeated with perfect consistency, always at 1:58 a.m., always lasting exactly 34 seconds, always showing the same impossible figure appearing across all camera angles. And on the third occurrence, Caleb noticed something new. The signal pulses from the tower were not random, but appeared to be forming a repeating sequence that matched the pattern of the interference itself, as if the tower was not malfunctioning, but transmitting a response to something outside. And when he reported this to the company, they dismissed it as equipment error and told him to continue standard maintenance. But Caleb began to notice subtle environmental changes as well, including the gradual disappearance of wildlife sounds near the tower, the increasing difficulty in maintaining radio contact, and the unsettling feeling that the forest around him was subtly reorganizing itself, with paths appearing slightly different each time he stepped outside, until on the fifth night, the system outage extended beyond the usual 34 seconds, lasting nearly 2 minutes. And during that extended blackout, Caleb heard something physically moving around the outside of the building, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the structure, despite no visual confirmation on backup infrared sensors. And when the systems came back online, every camera feed showed the same image again. The figure now significantly closer than before, standing just inside the fenced perimeter, despite no recorded entry. And that was when Caleb discovered something buried in the system archives, hidden beneath layers of corrupted data. A log entry from 5 years earlier when the station was first installed, describing an initial test phase in which engineers recorded a brief, unexplained signal originating from deep within the forest that repeated at precise intervals and appeared to increase in strength whenever it was monitored. And the final line of that old report simply stated, "Do not maintain continuous observation," with no signature or explanation. And Caleb realized with growing dread that every time the system had been repaired in the past, the outages had returned faster, as if something was learning from each interaction. And on the 6th night, he attempted to shut down the entire relay manually, but the shutdown command failed repeatedly, overridden by a system process labeled only as in-keying. And at 1:58 a.m., the figure appeared not only on external cameras, but also inside the building's internal thermal sensors, standing directly behind him, despite no physical presence being visible in the room. And for the first time, the system logs recorded a new message forming inside the transmission itself, a sequence of structured pulses that translated into no known language, but that Caleb instinctively understood as recognition, as if the system was acknowledging his awareness. And in panic, he attempted to disconnect all power sources, but the tower continued transmitting regardless, powered by something not listed in any electrical schematic. And when he finally ran outside, expecting to escape the signal range, he discovered that the forest itself had gone completely silent again. Not naturally silent, but artificially so, as if all environmental feedback had been suspended. And at exactly 1:58 a.m., every night, system time across all his devices synchronized without input, and the final recorded camera footage shows Caleb standing at the edge of the forest, staring at the tower as the figure appears behind him on every feed simultaneously, and then both disappear from all sensors at the same instant. And when the company sent a replacement technician 3 weeks later, they found the station fully operational, logs reset, systems stable, and no sign of Caleb ever being there. But the transmission pattern continued exactly as before, now stronger, more stable, and extending farther into the surrounding region. And today, hikers occasionally report hearing faint electrical pulses in the forest at night, always around 1:58 a.m., always followed by complete silence. And some claim they see a tall shape near the tower when the signal peaks, standing still as if waiting for something to respond. And according to unofficial internal reports that were later leaked and then removed, the worst discovery was not that the signal exists, but that it behaves differently every time someone listens to it for too long, as if it is adapting, refining, and learning, who is paying attention. And if those reports are true, then the relay station was never malfunctioning at all. It was simply a point where something from inside the transmission began reaching outward, testing how close it could get before someone realized they were already part of the system itself. Story 13. In the winter of 2018, a wildfire monitoring project deployed an experimental network of high-resolution thermal drones across a vast, protected forest reserve that had previously experienced only minor seasonal fires, a region considered stable enough for autonomous surveillance, and therefore left mostly unpatrolled by human rangers. But within the first month of operation, the system began recording something that did not match any known fire behavior, because instead of detecting heat spreading outward in chaotic patterns, several drones captured a consistent, structured thermal signature deep within the forest that appeared in the same location every night at exactly 3:06 a.m., showing a perfectly vertical column of heat rising from the ground, with no surrounding ignition source, no smoke dispersion, and no signs of combustion damage in surrounding vegetation. And when analysts first reviewed the footage, they assumed it was a calibration error or sensor reflection caused by atmospheric inversion layers. But the anomaly persisted across multiple drones using different hardware, different flight paths, and different altitudes, always returning the same result. A concentrated thermal anomaly that appeared briefly, remained stable for exactly 47 seconds, and then vanished completely, without leaving any residual heat signature in the environment. And because the pattern repeated nightly, with increasing intensity, the forestry department dispatched a ground investigation team led by field researcher Dr. Mira Lang, who arrived at the reserve, expecting either a geological heat vent or a concealed human source, such as illegal burning activity. But upon entering the region, she immediately noticed that the forest behaved abnormally in subtle ways, because animal life was almost entirely absent within a 5-mile radius of the anomaly's coordinates, and even natural sounds like wind through leaves seemed muted, as if the environment itself was dampening external noise. And when the team established a temporary observation post, they deployed thermal scanners, infrared motion sensors, and acoustic mapping devices, all of which initially returned normal readings until exactly 3:05 a.m. So, when every device in the field simultaneously began showing low-level interference patterns that slowly synchronized into a single repeating waveform, and at 3:06 a.m., the drones overhead captured the anomaly again, but this time the thermal column appeared larger, more structured, and far more defined, as if it had gained depth and dimensionality. And within that brief 47-second window, one drone recorded something unexpected, a faint silhouette at the base of the heat source, human in shape, but too still to be biologically consistent, standing perfectly centered beneath the vertical column, as though positioned deliberately. And when the footage was enhanced frame by frame, the silhouette appeared not to be casting heat at all, but absorbing it, creating a void-like absence in the thermal signature around its body. And after the anomaly disappeared, the surrounding terrain showed no trace of combustion, no disturbance of soil, and no ecological damage, which contradicted every known explanation for such a heat pattern. And over the following nights, Dr. Lang began to notice that the anomaly was not simply repeating, but evolving, because each appearance shifted slightly closer to the observation camp, reducing the distance by an almost exact measurable amount each cycle. And the waveform interference recorded before each event began to include faint, structured pulses that resembled coded transmissions bursts rather than random noise. And when she attempted to triangulate the source, using synchronized sensor arrays, she discovered that all devices pointed not to a fixed location underground or in the sky, but to a moving coordinate that changed precisely at the moment the anomaly appeared, as if the source was not in a place but in a state of activation. And on the 7th night, the team decided to send a drone directly into the anomaly. Expected emergence zones at 3:06 a.m. And what they captured became the last complete recording from the expedition, because at the exact moment the thermal column formed, the drone camera feed did not show fire, heat, or combustion, but instead showed a perfectly clear image of the forest in daylight conditions for a fraction of a second, as if time or perception had been briefly overwritten, followed immediately by total data corruption across all systems. And when backup storage was recovered later, the file contained only a single continuous audio tone matching the same waveform that had been building each night. And Dr. Lang reported that after that incident, all equipment began showing brief false positives, even in unrelated areas of the forest, as if the system had learned how to replicate its own signature elsewhere. And within 2 weeks, the anomaly began appearing outside the reserve boundary, detected by unrelated satellites and private aircraft, operating hundreds of miles away, always at 3:06 a.m., always lasting exactly 47 seconds, and always followed by complete absence of residual evidence. And although official reports labeled it a rare atmospheric and geological interaction phenomenon, internal notes from the research team described a far more disturbing pattern, suggesting that the anomaly was not a fire source at all, but a repeating point of contact between the visible environment and something that only became measurable when observed collectively, as if awareness itself was stabilizing its presence. And today the forest reserve remains closed for public access, but satellite scans still occasionally detect brief vertical thermal spikes deep within the same region, now occurring at irregular intervals, and field technicians who review the data have noted a consistent pattern. The closer the monitoring becomes, the more precise the anomaly becomes in return, until it behaves less like an event and more like a response. And according to leaked field logs that were never officially confirmed, the final warning left by Dr. Lang simply read that whatever is appearing at 3:06 a.m. is no longer emerging from the ground, but arriving because something above has finally noticed it was already being watched. Story 14. In 2011, a remote avalanche monitoring station was installed high in an isolated mountain range where winter storms were so severe that entire valleys could remain sealed off for months. And the system was designed to be fully autonomous. Satellite-linked sensors, seismic microphones, pressure detectors, and thermal cameras capable of tracking snow shifts in real time, all feeding into a central hub that would alert authorities if a catastrophic collapse was imminent. But for the first year, everything operated normally, recording expected snowfall patterns, minor tremors, and predictable ice movements until late January, when the system began detecting something it was never designed to interpret: perfectly periodic low-frequency vibrations deep beneath the mountain that did not match any known tectonic behavior, glacier movement, or atmospheric pressure cycle. Because instead of random instability, the readings formed a structured rhythm, repeating every hour with precise consistency, as if something below the mountain was producing controlled mechanical pulses rather than natural seismic noise. And when engineers reviewed the data, they initially assumed a calibration drift in the underground sensors, but the pattern persisted across all independent devices installed at different depths and locations, which immediately ruled out technical error. And on February 3rd, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the entire monitoring network recorded a simultaneous spike across every sensor, not upward or downward movement, but a synchronized alignment of all readings into a single waveform. And at the same moment, the external cameras captured something unusual on the mountain's surface: a faint, linear distortion in the snow stretching across the slope like seam being pressed from beneath, though no collapse or fracture followed. And by the next morning, the snow had completely returned to normal, with no visible trace of disturbance. But the underground pulse had intensified, becoming stronger, clearer, and more structured each night, until researchers sent a field team led by engineer Daniel Kessler to manually inspect the site. And when he arrived at the mountain base, he noticed that the snowpack itself seemed unnaturally stable, despite recent storm warnings, almost too evenly distributed, as if layered with mathematical precision. And as he climbed toward the monitoring station, he began to notice subtle anomalies in the environment, including sections of snow that gave off faint heat despite freezing conditions, and areas where wind patterns seemed disrupted in narrow corridors, as if something solid but invisible was altering airflow beneath the surface. And upon reaching the station, he found all systems functioning normally, yet displaying identical timestamp anomalies, with every recorded event labeled at exactly 2:14 a.m., regardless of when it occurred. And that night he decided to remain inside the observation shelter to witness the phenomenon directly. And at 2:13 a.m., all seismic sensors simultaneously flattened into a single baseline reading, as if the mountain had become completely still, followed by an absolute silence so deep that even the structural creaking of the building ceased. And at 2:14 a.m., every device activated at once, not with error signals, but with coordinated output showing a massive, expanding geometric formation beneath the mountain, perfectly circular and far larger than the entire range itself. And at the same moment, external cameras captured a slow upward bulge in the snow surface that moved with deliberate precision rather than collapse, like something below was eyes of rising carefully rather than breaking through. And Daniel reported via radio that the mountain was not settling, but waking, before all communications abruptly shifted into a repeating tone that matched the underground vibration pattern exactly. And when backup systems attempted to override the signal, they instead synchronized with it, locking every device into the same rhythmic pulse. And for 36 seconds, all data streams showed the same impossible image: a vast hollow structure beneath the mountain, rotating slowly like a mechanical system, activating after long dormancy, and then everything cut out at precisely 2:14:36 a.m., leaving only manual instruments active, which recorded one final event: a single pressure wave rising from deep below and spreading outward across the entire range in perfect symmetry. And when emergency teams arrived 2 days later, they found the station intact, doors unlocked, equipment functioning, but Daniel Kessler missing, along with all digital storage devices containing the final hour of data, while the snow around the site had formed an unusually smooth circular depression that matched the underground structure seen in the recordings, and no avalanche had ever occurred, despite conditions that should have triggered multiple collapses. And in the months that followed, similar low-frequency pulses were detected in other mountain ranges worldwide, always at exactly 2:14 a.m., always, lasting precisely 36 seconds, as if the phenomenon had expanded beyond a single location and was now replicating across different points of the planet. And researchers who analyzed the pattern concluded that it was not random seismic activity, but a coordinated system responding to observation itself. Because every time additional sensors were deployed, the signal grew clearer, more stable, and more structured, as though it was adapting to the act of being measured. And today, the original monitoring site remains buried under permanent snow cover, inaccessible and officially inactive. But satellite data still occasionally records brief, synchronized tremors beneath the mountain that match no known geological process. And according to leaked internal reports that were later removed from public archives, the final conclusion written by the original research team, stated that whatever lies beneath the mountain is not moving toward the surface in the traditional sense, but is instead aligning itself with moments when it is being watched, as if the entire structure only becomes real when something above it is aware enough to notice it. And every recorded pulse still ends at 2:14 a.m., as though that exact moment is when it finishes deciding whether it has been observed correctly or not.